Martin. I feel somehow a weird feeling that we're going to be talking about ecology and critical zone, which is very political and social, here at the venue of one of the biggest international art fair here. So let's enjoy talking about many things. So I'm looking forward to your presentation as well as the audience here. So please do your presentation first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Again, thank you very much for inviting me for this audience. I'm very happy I can join here, and I would like to thank everyone for the invitation to you, and I'm really looking forward for the entire discussion. Indeed, what we're going to talk about can be a bit dense at some points, so please, by no means, don't hesitate to ask a question while we discuss. And I think I'm going to start the presentation. So the point I wanted to talk about, first of all, what I need to do before I start this discussion is of course, paying a homage to the wonderful philosopher with whom we did these projects, Bruno Latour, who was one of the most inspiring figures that I think anyone who met could ever experience. And Bruno Latour himself was an extraordinary thinker because he had the possibility not only to think through philosophy, not only the possibility to study different kind of field works, but he also had such a belief that the huge problems that he was working on needed to be tackled through not only ideas, but also feelings, experiences, and therefore did so much work in order to try things in terms of cinema, in terms of theater, in terms of experimental writing and exhibitions. And I was so lucky to work with him for more than 6 years, actually, on projects, including the Critical Zone. And again, I want to give a homage to this extraordinary thinker who leave us with a huge legacy and a huge amount of work to do. Part of the legacy that Bruno left to us is this idea that the conception of the Earth that we have is not necessarily the proper one anymore. The Earth has changed. Since we entered in what some scientists call the Anthropocene, the fact that we thought that Earth climate was relatively stable. We thought that the geological era in which we are was relatively stable, and that the geological era was only changed by the impact of volcanoes, tectonic plates movement, acidity of the oceans, etc., etc. Big phenomenon at a global scale. And we have now realized that actually humans are part of the geological change. Humans are impacting the Earth almost as much as the Earth system, almost as much as a volcano would, or as big major geological shifts. And that's an immense news to absorb. It's absolutely mind-blowing when you think about it, to think that that humans have become a factor of geological change. It's not only a change of era, the Anthropocene, it's also a change of the space in which we are. And so there was one thing that we wanted to do with this project, which was of Critical Zones, which was to try to change the shared representations of the world from the idea of a globe that you see on the left to the idea of a critical zone that you see in the center, And the idea of a critical zone, it's really the critical zone. It's instead of looking at the Earth as a big ball, it's really looking at the Earth as a very, very small layer, a thin layer, where you're going to have. We're not going to take care. We're not going to look into. We're not going to apprehend the Earth as this massive globe. We're going to apprehend only the few kilometers that are on top of our heads and the few kilometers under our feet. So it's, if you want to take a comparison, it's a bit like if instead of taking, if Earth was an orange, the critical zone would only be the skin of the orange. And one of the things that is important to say is that actually I'll say one more thing about the slide before. Do you see the image on the right? Yeah. So if you see the image on the right, this is a small landscape. That's the design of a small landscape that explains to you a bit how, what do scientists study in the critical zone? Because of course, they cannot study the Earth as a whole. Like that would take too many resources. What they do is the scientists working in the critical zones are gonna group themselves together in some specific places, in some specific observatories, to look at how the water, the rock, the bedrock, the air, the animals, so the fauna, the plants, the flora, all of them interact together. And why is that important? Is that it's extremely important because it's these interactions that allow life on Earth. So again, instead of thinking that we are on a globe, we are not on a globe, we are within a critical zone, which is, again, this thin layer that spreads across that is spread around us. And one of the big observatories, actually, that there is one big observatory, for example, that we can think of in terms of the critical zone. One big observatory that is based in Taiwan, in the region in the center, in a region called Taiyuge. My accent is very bad, but Taroko. It's a national natural resource. And you can see here that you have you have those gorges that are very, very beautiful. And you see on the right that scientists are setting up different kind of equipments. Actually, the scientists have very different specialties. The one installing the equipment right now, Jens, is a mathematician. He also works with hydrologists, so scientists studying the water, and scientists studying various kinds of elements. And so what they really do is that they look at phenomena in this critical zone observatory, which is pretty much, to explain again what an observatory is, it's kind of a lab, but instead of being indoors, it's outdoors. But you still have instrumentations, you still have tools, you still have many sort of things to monitor and study different phenomena. And here they are looking at erosions. Erosions being when water displaces rocks or sediments. And it's actually interesting because that you see on the left, is one of the, this river has been created about 100 times quicker here than in the rest of the world. Because in Taiwan, the erosion is extremely quick. It's the quickest rate in the world, apparently, according to what we're told on site. So again, that means that rocks, sediments get carried away in a very, very quick manner. And because this is so extraordinary, the fact that the river, that the mountains get carved by the river so quickly, this makes that one of really interesting places to study on Earth. And therefore, that's why the Critical Zone Observatory one critical zone observatory was placed here. There are many other critical zone observatory, but I'm taking this example as a concrete one because it's not that far from where you are in Japan right now, and it's a very beautiful place to visit. And we were, of course, working with artists in residence. We were working with artists with residence that we brought to this observatory. So, for example, here is a work of the artist Su Yuxin. Su Yuxin went into that observatory with us, spent a lot of time discussing with the scientists, spent a lot of time discussing how to various questions to raise battery on the ground with the scientists. And so what you see here is that she did this very beautiful multimedia installation. It's not multimedia, actually. It's like 7 different projections where the screen, as you see, is always like the screen is always tilted a bit or shifting a bit on its axis. Her idea was that you should never be just in front. You should not be in a frontal relationship with the various images. You should kind of be immersed within it. And so that's why, like the images on your right, on your left, in front of you, surrounding you. And all of the images that she took were from that observatory in Taroko, because what she's interested in, what Su Yuxin is interested in, there are several points, but one of the points I could talk about is the fact that according to her, there is the need for redrawing the maps. When you look at a map, it's supposed to tell you very much, you're in a position where you're far from the map and you can say how to go from a point A to a point B, and you're kind of disconnected from it. Here she's trying to see, okay, what would be a map where the important thing is not necessarily how do I go from one place to the next, but rather what are the geochemical processes that are key for an area to sustain itself. That's one of the first points. Like she's trying to draw an immersive experience rather than a detached experience. The second point that she's looking at is that there is a paradox, that is that we are within the critical zone, and she wants to give this feeling of what does it mean to develop a point of view from within. And when she is, when you're doing a film, a documentary film, there is always the risk of being outside of your subject of study. There is always the risk of being, propelled in keeping a sort of distance with your subject matter. And therefore, what she tries to do here is like experimenting with a camera that, as you see here, is going to go under the water, above the rock, nested in some trees, going to look at the tools necessary to, in the lab, outside of, within the lab, outside of the lab, within the area. What I'm just trying to say is like, what she tries to do is, as a cinematographer, to be included within the object of work that she does. And there's actually 2 different models that we can talk about in terms of the references that she was interested in. She was inspired by 2 different mathematicians. One called Lagrange, who developed in the 18th century a model where when you observe something, you're on a fixed referential point, and so the world is moving around you. That's the Euler framework. And there is a second one that is used by Lagrange, which is like when you study an object moving in the world, you move in the world with it. And so therefore, what she's interested in is to switch back from these two perspectives, from Euler and Lagrange, shifting back and forth to give this very dynamic sense. Another artwork that was realized after this residency was done by the Taiwanese artist Zhang Yongda. So what Yongda did was that he worked with scientists from the critical zone to reuse some machines that replicate erosion mechanism. Again, erosion, coming few slides before, erosion is what allows to carry sediments. So that's typically how, like you had the mountains between those two gorges, you had the mountain, the water arrived and carved everything so that it ended up being, as you see on the left, it ended up being a river instead of being a mountain, because the water is going to infiltrate and in the end carry it's going to dig down, let's say, in depth, the various sediments. And so what Yongta did is he worked with some scientists to recreate that machine that is sort of a mini landscape factory. It's a mini landscape factory in the sense that you see these little black balls here. They are hitting the little black balls that you see here on the, voilà. They are hitting those discs, and by the end of the exhibition, those discs are carved. They are carved, there is a sort of movement on them as if it was a mini landscape. Because what happens is that, what happens is that these machines are replicating the turbulences of the Liu River, that is the river I was showing to you before. They're replicating those turbulences, which means that it's exactly as if, it's exactly replicating the movement of the water in the river, carrying some little bits of rocks that are going to hit the ground like this, and little by little form this sort of mini landscape. So what is quite beautiful with the Yongtai's piece is that he's making this kind of sculpture with the most, let's call it's the most traditional medium for a sculptor, marble. But he's not sculpting the marble with his hands. He's sculpting it with an algorithm that replicates the flow of a river, which I find very poetic in a way. And there is something else. There is another element. Is you see that here there is this sort of purple, this tank with purple water. Actually, after a few days, the purple water would become completely transparent, because actually, as again, he's playing with the chemical process, but you see here the water is full with the water is white because it's full with, again, sediments, little bits of rock that have detached themselves and that are floating in the water. And so therefore, because there is this sort of there's quite a lot of acidity within it, and because there's quite a lot of acidity within it, it's going to send some gas within the water, which is going to change the chemical composition of which is going to change the chemical composition of the water, and the water is going to go from purple to transparent. So again, what is quite beautiful is he's painting in a way, playing with pigments, but using chemistry and not using a paintbrush. So that's, again, one of the statements that he's making of displacing the role of the process of sculpture through geochemical and algorithmic practices. I'm going to switch exhibitions because right now I talked to you about connections that we had in the critical zone in Taipei, because few artists were coming from the critical zone. Let's say that we invited 2 artists in Taipei to work on a critical zone observatory, but we also did a large exhibition in ZKM, which was completely focused on this very notion of critical zone. The 2 exhibitions were occurring at the same time, but in very different places. And so they were, let's say, although they differed, because the Taipei Biennial critical zone was a small part of it and was dealing with many other things, they still had a connection. And I think it's interesting with the one at ZKM. ZKM is in Cal, and it's interesting to notify the fact that there would be links between the 2. So here we have you're in one of the courtyards of ZKM, and you can see a very beautiful piece by Julien Charrière. Julien Charrière is a Swiss artist who went into the desert so he went in South America, in the Lago de Uruguay, which is in Chile, which is a blank white salt, beautiful desert. And actually, he did this piece a few years ago, and it's really it was at the moment when it was discovered that there was lithium under this beautiful salt desert, white, pristine desert. And therefore, lithium, as you probably know, lithium is what's used in order to fuel our phones, our digital technologies, the very computer I'm using in order to speak with you right now. So it's very likely that the lithium in this desert is going to be used, is going to be extracted, and therefore, and of course, it will ruin that beautiful desert that is pristine and beautiful. And so, what the artist has done is he's decided to create a sort of inverted monuments, if one could say, a sort of a monument to something which will happen in the future. Usually, you do a monument for something that happened in the past. He decides to make a monument for something that will happen in the future, which will be pursuing the extractivism that is going to occur for lithium. And so what you see here is these are the sediments. Those columns here are the sediments of salt that are taken from this place in Chile, Lago de Uruguay. The little green parts that you see that are incorporated, the kind of fluid that are incorporated within the columns, these are the liquids that are part of the pool containing the lithium. And so, in a way, what is very beautiful is that he makes, again, a monument that is for the future and not the past. And he also makes a monument where he puts all of this salt that is stacked up in the direction of going up is actually, the salt is coming from digging down into the ground. And so his statement about extractivism is to show in positive the hole that is digged in negative into the ground, so that we can extract those resources and keep fueling our extremely energy consuming and devastating extractivist regime. So it was interesting for us to show the pit at ZKM look uncannily like the pillars at ZKM look uncannily like those pillars. ZKM in itself, as a museum, has a strong history. It was an ammunition factory during World War II, and then it was on the German side. So with a very heavy and loaded past. And in the 90s, it was decided that this place would become a center for experiment between art and science. Peter Weibel, who just retired, led incredible exhibitions there for many years, and the one that the Critical Zone was actually one of his last the last exhibitions on which he directed. And so what was interesting for us is to create. So you see this building that was really made to resist explosions as a bomb factory. So with these very strong pillars. Here, it was very interesting to have the pillars by Julien Charrière that are very fragile, very soft, very, in French, you would say friable, that could get eroded themselves. It was just creating a very beautiful contrast between the harshness of the architecture and the fragility of Julien Charrière's sculpture. And of course, it was also connected to one of the theoretical issues that we're interested in with the critical zone, with this exhibition, which was the notion of ghost acres. And the ghost acres is ghost acreage is ghost. It's a notion that was coined by a historian called Kenneth Pomerantz, who is a historian of the 19th century, who looked at the figures in the 19th century of how the average English in the 19th century would not only benefit from the land around him to cultivate and to get his food, but would also benefit from lots of products that would come from the colonies. And therefore, each British person would have, in the 19th century, the equivalent of I don't remember the exact figure, so I would have to double check. Sorry, it's early in the morning, but I think it was 5 or 6 acres around the world in order to feed him. So that's quite crazy, right? At that time, that's the territory of a British person in the 19th century was already not only in Britain, but already spread across the world because of all the resources that they were pumping out from the rest of the world through the colonial regime of Britain. It happens to be that, and so that is what Kenneth Pomerantz calls the ghost acres. Today, the situation is much worse in the sense that, let's say, if I take an example as a French person, I am sure it's very difficult for me to see where all the resources I use on a day-to-day basis come from, because my computer, all the resources that are necessary only to make my computer could go across the globe. And so the footprint, the impacts, the reach of the territory that is necessary to fuel my day-to-day territory has increased completely. And that's this kind of difficulty that we wanted to address within this issue of the ghost acres. Anyway, I was finishing the point on the ghost acre, which is about the difference between the territory where we live physically, our houses, our offices, and the territory from which we live, where we draw our resources from. And of course, the idea that Julien Charrière had by connecting himself to this question of the lithium, that is such an important component to design our materials, to design our computers, was expressing that in a very interesting way. I want to show you one more work. Let me reshare my screen. And so you had other works nearby, such as this work by Ottobong Nkanga, who's a very interesting African artist working in Europe. Ottobong Nkanga here, like this is a tapestry. So it's not made of it's a tapestry. It's not made with painting. It's really made with weaving that are weaved together. And what you can see is actually in the different parts of the you can see those photographs that are in round shapes that are parts of places where there is extraction that happens. So where we removed some materials, some elements for extraction purposes, or like that she sees as sort of scars. It looks like scars, like as if the earth had been scarred and like had been digged with a knife. And you see that the background looks like a representation of the globe, and yet we cannot see the globe again. And that was very interesting for us. The fact that it looks like a map, but it's difficult to see exactly what the map corresponds to. And you see on the side that there are two people that are two figures that are carrying that are holding this network network of different pieces of landscape that have been altered by human activity. And you see that they don't have a hand, they only have arms. And that's, again, a very strong statement about this kind of those kind of corporate machines that process things through a sort of it's a very the extractivism here is depicted as a very well orchestrated ceremony that doesn't have a centralized brain, but where the responsibility is spread across different elements of network. And so that again gives a very interesting representation, a very, very interesting feel of what the critical zone might look like. And as I'm running out of time, I think I just want to end up again with this a parallel, a historical parallel between the critical zone and the globe on how we can think of the fact that it's huge to imagine that we have that Earth is composed in a different way than what we think it is. It's much easier. It's much harder. To land in an Earth that is completely new, in the sense that it's not new in the sense that it didn't exist before. It's new in the sense that humans have not realized how important it was to approach the fact that we are within that thin varnish of the critical zone. We are within these different cycles that mix together the rock, the floor, the fauna, the water, and that really we are not only in this ecosystem, but because ecosystems that's at the surface of the Earth, but that the few kilometers underneath of geology are also very important to life. And that all of these layers under our feet and over our head matter in order to sustain life on Earth. That's a huge change in representation, but changes in representation of the Earth already happened many times through history. Let's think, and that's a parallel that Bruno Latour was doing with Frédéric Etouati. Let's think of the 17th century when Galileo discovered that the Earth was not the center of the universe. That was a huge change in terms of cosmological representation. And few decades later, it was completely absorbed. And so it's this, in a way, we're back to the 17th century where Earth has changed and we need to redraw our relationship to it. And that's one of the really important work that needs to be done, and therefore I'm really important that it's really important to dig within this Earth, not to dig actually to to immerse oneself into this Earth that has changed and take all the consequences that stem from it on a cosmological point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martin. I'd like to let you know that the word Anthropocene, which is a geological term in which human activities, both collectively and individually, has an inevitable impact on the Earth, has actually come to the forefront of even Japanese contemporary art world. So many people, I think, are interested in the term itself. So many people also are interested in your co-curated exhibition at ZKM, like Reset Modernity or Critical Zone. But as far as I observe, the word critical zone is a little bit less well known than the term Anthropocene. So I would like to ask you to elaborate the word a little bit more. So let me start my first question with the terminology. I think the word critical is kind of understandable word, but the other one, so I would like to focus on the other one, the word zone. It seems to me that the term zone is more ambiguous and less clear-cut than the similar term, including territory, landscape, area, borderland, and so on and so on. So the choice of the word zone is intentional one?
Hello, it's a wonderful question, but because thank you, because you're unpacking really some of the thinking that we had through the Anthropocene, as you said perfectly well, and it's now a very well known world. It's even and that's a good thing. It's even gone now. It's even not only the art world was very important in disseminating this scientific discovery, but now it's even going mainstream. You see films. I saw a Hollywood film the other day where they were talking about the Anthropocene. I was like, wow, okay, there's been I think it was Stillwater in the film. The thing is that with the Anthropocene, you also know that the reason why we don't use it too much is not because it doesn't describe something that is very interesting, that is the fact that humans have become a geological force. That's extremely important. We still need to absorb that. Although we know the word now, we still need to act in consequence, that the work is to be done. But the reason why we kind of like got not away from it, but didn't use it too much is that there's been also lots of criticism about, why would the condition of humanity would be defined from the vantage point of view of the anthropos, that is the Greek man. There is no reason that it's the entire framework of humanity gets defined from the same, return to the Greek man. It's just in a way of like trying to decolonize the term. Critical zone now, as I was saying in the beginning, what is interesting is like when you study the critical zone, you can study geology, but you can also study other. It's more complete as grouping of scientists. It's not only geologists; it's also scientists who study bacteria, scientists who study the water, a hydrologist, mathematicians who work on erosion. And again, what I want to stress is that critical zone is not a science in itself. Critical zone, it's grouping of scientists that group themselves together around observatories to study the dynamics of the Earth. And one of the things that one could say actually is that. It's you in a way like what was funny is like as we asked scientists why critical zones were called critical zones, because it's not a term that Latour invented, it's a term that he picked up from the scientists. We got different answers every time. Critical zone sometimes we were told that it's because like something is it's to do with thermodynamic. It's when something is not in a state of balance. It's when it's always in kind of imbalance. So that's the term critical. It has nothing to do with critique as we know it in the social sciences, critique as this way of thinking that the social scientist, a thinker is going to unveil a veil and reveal the truth behind through the act of critique. That has nothing to do with it, but it has to do with critical, which is keeping things in a state, in a thermodynamic state that is sort of actually slightly imbalanced, but therefore in check. And so that's a reference to the flows of functionment in the Earth system. Now, in terms of the zone is just because they were looking for a word that could describe a specific area. That could have been the critical area if you want, but zone, the idea is to say, okay, we're not going to get interested in Earth, in the middle of the Earth. We're going to be interested in the superficial aspect of the Earth. Like, again, as I was saying, and as I'm showing on the slide here, it's a bit like, how do you define the crust? If Earth was an orange, how do we define the crust of the orange? The crust of the orange is a zone, and that's why they use the term, I think.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I would like to move to my second question. Now, actually, the importance of ecological thought could not be more pressing than now, I think. So, but actually, we need to take action. Otherwise, we will face the kind of destructive future. So, but in order to take an action, we need to change our perception on ecology or on the Earth itself. So could you, what do you think about the possibility on changing the perception to see the Earth or more widely, something that's surrounding us through artistic practice or through art exhibition?
I mean, I think you beautifully give the seeds of the answer in your question, in the sense that you're right. We talk about action, and it's very important to act. And there's many actions that are necessary that we can debate about, the spreads of the actions that are necessary. But in order to act, we also need to change certain conceptions. We need concepts to navigate in the world, right? Concepts to navigate the world. And therefore, what was interesting in an exhibition like that is that artists take us through, like a various path that kind of like helps to shape a different conception of what the world could be related. How could we relate to the world differently? And again, I want to say that living on a globe, it's very different than living within the critical zone, because the globe is this solid bowl from which you can extract resources and circulate them. So the globe, it was very useful for globalization, for the project of globalization, because it's not a living space. It's a dead object, from an inert object from which you can extract materials, package them. You can send them in commercial, you can make all those commercial exchange very easily. That's the project of globalization. What is the project of the critical zone? That's what we want to ask. How would that change everything in terms of, and it's not a grand idea, actually. It's also like it influences like our day-to-day practices on like how we would concretely rework our relationship to our territory on a day-to-day basis if we land within that space that will be completely different, apprehended in a different manner.
Thank you. Actually, what is interesting for me is that the process of observing and the process of exhibiting or making another exhibition seems to be both interconnected and separated at the same time. it seems to me. So I would like to ask
exhibition what? Sorry.
The process of observing, so at observatory, and the process of making an exhibition is both interconnected and separated at the same time. So because there are two processes. So what do you think about the process of the connection between observing something and making another exhibition based on that observation?
I think, just as a note, like again, like that's a very good remark you're making, and for critical zones in Germany, like in ZKM, the subtitle I had proposed to Bruno Latour and Peter Weibel was observatories or earthly politics, because that very notion of observatories was something very important. Not if observation is not a passive thing where you're separated from something. It's observation becomes interesting if you're included within your objective of study, just like the film that Su Yushin is trying to do, whereas she's a filmmaker, but she's trying to see what it is for a filmmaker to be involved within the landscape that she's trying to depict. So observation as a passive thing, no, but observation as an active process, yes, that can very much connect both to scientific activity and to an aesthetic processing that you would have in an artistic exhibition, for sure.
Thank you so much. I have another question. It might be a little bit simple, but what do you think about the possibility of collaboration among curators, artists, and scientists and scholars from your experience of making critical zone exhibitions?
I think it's a totally valid question. I cannot give you a general answer because it really depends on the basis, case-by-case basis. What I think worked really well is when artists took seriously the work of the scientists and, really made the effort to understand what they were doing and kept in touch with them without, at the same time, taking too much of their time. That's the full balance. And for example, when we did these residencies in the Critical Zone Observatory in the Gorge of Taroko, that was the connection with the scientists were very good because they're desperate to transmit their forms of knowledge. They're talking about the fact that they want to find channels to get people sensitive to their issues, and they're also very curious intellectually speaking and sensorially speaking. And so if the artist comes with the idea that he's going to do his own thing, he's not here to illustrate, but he's here to explore something with the scientist, and that he works hard enough so that he doesn't disturb the scientists, but that they have an exchange together, that works really beautifully. And I have to say that was the case during both the Critical Zone exhibition and the Taipei Biennial, actually.
Thank you so much. I'd like to go back to the concept of critical zone again. I think, of course, what you think about critical zone includes both humans and non-humans as well. But what about the role of a non-living entity, including rocks or trees or seas, water or whatever, in your thought of critical zone, or in your art exhibition making in relation to critical zone? What is the role of a non-living entity?
Because I think there are two parts in your question. So there's the first one that is scientific and the second one that is artistic. On the scientific level, again, I'll go back on the first slide. The third image that you see on the right, on the first slide, this I just showed it to say that it's because there is an interaction between the rock, the water, the trees, the fauna, the air, that all of these interact together in ways that create the conditions of life on Earth. But then for the artists, in terms of work, I would say that again, like, you know, there is it's a matter of the curiosity of the artist. Like some of them might, like Yongta is interested in this kind of geological / geochemical process. So it gives so much room for inspiration about very important and interesting and exciting phenomena to the artist. Like that would be my my very short answer.
Thank you so much. So what time, how many minutes left? Okay, so Martin, actually I have a lot of questions more, but we need to close the session because soon there is a next session as well.
There you go.
Yeah, actually, to conclude, I would like to emphasize that, as you said in the beginning, we have a lot of, we could extract much more things from the legacy of Bruno Latour, who suddenly and shockingly passed away very recently. So I think you are one of the person who tried to excavate his legacy from artistic and curatorial activity. So I would like to see what you are going to do in the future as well. So thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I wish you a beautiful day. Thank you so much for the invitation.